Start in the name of Allah, who is merciful and most beneficent. Dear students, today we are going to discuss Shakespearean comedy. Comedy, in simple terms, means that the play ends happily for the protagonist. It is also a play aimed at producing laughter. A Shakespearean comedy has both these elements. He exposes the ridiculous follies and foibles with a gentle and sympathetic touch. These are essentially two kinds of comedy. There are follows. So, number one is classical comedy, and number second is romantic comedy. Before going with the class, I would like to discuss that earlier we have discussed that Shakespearean tragedy element. As you know, that we have discussed the element of Shakespearean tragedy. There were 9 to 10 element of Shakespearean tragedy, and the same is the case with we are going to discuss Shakespearean comedy. So now there is a difference, that the same man who was dealing with the tragedy and the same man who is dealing with the comedy, there is a something to understand, that how a man who is writing about the tragedy up to the mark, and who is writing finest tragedy, who is writing very good tragedy, who is the all in all in the tragedy, who is the master of tragedy. On the other hand, he is writing comedy. So now there is a, both things are very opposite, and both things are very opponent one another, that one is dealing with the tragedy and the same person is dealing on the second end with the comedy. So classical comedy is there. This kind of comedy follows the rule of dramatic composition as laid down by the ancient Greek and Roman master. The rulers of classical comedy are as followers. The number one, the unities of time, place and action are observed. So this is the first rule of classical comedy. In classical comedy, the unity of time. Time is a very key element, as we say, as we state in our general life. Time keeping is very good habit. Time is money, time is everything, and the same is the case with the classical comedy. There is the first thing and the fundamental thing is time, unity of time, and the second thing is place and action. Yes, when you are going to deal with the time, and on the other hand, second thing is place, where that act, where that comedy is being placed, and the third thing is what was the action, how the ruler, how the protagonist, how the actor is playing with these three things. Number one, time, number second, place, and number third, action. And the second thing is the comic and the tragic elements are strictly kept separated from one another. Yes, the comic and tragic element, both are obviously opposite, both are different, and in the comedy and in the tragedy, both elements are dealt. But basically in comedy, you are going to deal with the comedy and the comic and tragic element. Now, as earlier, basically, I have stated in the very first that same man is writing about the tragedy and the same man is writing about comedy. So, obviously, tragic elements are separate and comic elements are separate. And the third one is it deals with the realism and everyday life. Yes, comedy is there. As earlier I have stated that in simply in terms that mean a play with the happily ending, but it deals with the reality. This is another important point. When you are going to deal with the laughter, you are going to deal with some sort of laughing position, you are going to deal with the jokes. This is something else. The comedy is there, but in comedy, in literature, it deals with the realism and everyday life. This is not something like TikTok, this is not something like jokes, this is not something like that thing. This is a proper term that deals with the everyday life as well as realism. And the last one, it aims at correcting or satirizing some human folly, weakness or social vice through ridiculous. Yes, basically when we are living in a society and we are observing each and everything in our society, in our surrounding, we are saying that someone is doing something wrong and someone is doing something good. Both are in the society, but sometimes we use humor, we use style, as we have discussed and we have done with the Geoffrey Chaucer. Yes, the style is there. the characters are all deal with the style and humor. Same is the case here in the comedy. It aims at correcting or satirizing some human folly. When something is going to be done wrong, with comedy you are going to do something right. When you are going to critical, you are going to critic someone with the style, with the humor. And the same statement that I have given to the last line, if they are willing to sit in the class, they can sit in the class but silently, otherwise they can leave the class. So this is also some sort of style, this is some sort of humor, this is some sort of critical statement. But the thing is that we are dealing with the realism and we are dealing with the everyday situation. And the classical comedy laughs at people and not with them. The best known exponent of classical comedy in English is Ben Jonson. Yes, Ben Jonson is very good in this term. And the second and the last one is romantic comedy. Yes, you all are very familiar with the romantic one. You all are, mashallah, very intelligent in this term and you know each and everything. In this type of comedy, the rules of classical comedy are floated and it is written according to the dictates of his fancy. Shakespeare essentially wrote romantic comedies. He mingled the comic and the tragic, the serious and the happy. This made his plays appear and more realistic, since our lives also have a fair share of happy and sad. Shakespeare does not aim to correct stereotypes. His prime concern is innocent and good natural laughter. It is not as it follows. The extravagance are not exposed and ridiculous. In this comedy, we are actually not dealing with the some sort of our daily life comedy, and we are not dealing with classical comedy. This is totally opponent of classical comedy. In this term, we are dealing with the love, we are dealing with the romance, we are dealing with the other terms of feelings, emotions, and sentiments. So this is the basic concern of our basically Shakespearean comedy is poetic and creative. It has more imagination than pure reason. It is an artistic vision, not a critic exposition. Yes, as you know, and you all are familiar with the definition of poetry. Poetry is a spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings and emotion. When a writer is dealing and when the writer is writing something you can say normal text or prose. What is prose basically? Prose when you are going to deal with the work but without sentiments, without feelings, without emotion. When emotions and all things are held out, then the simple work is prose. And when we are going to deal with some sort of feelings, emotions, sentiments, and we are dealing with our extravagant emotions, then our comedy will be also the romantic. And the same is the thing with the normal work. When we are not dealing with that sort of thing, our work, our comedy is simple. But when we are dealing with some sort of romantic situation, we are dealing with the love, we are dealing with the sentiments. And another important thing is that in this term, on the classical term, we have deal that this comedy deal with the realism and everyday life. But here it is not dealing with the everyday life and realism. It is dealing with the imagination, it is dealing with the thoughts, it is dealing with romantic, it is dealing with the emotions, feeling, etc., etc. So this is the basic and the proper difference between these two terms, that how Shakespeare is dealing and how normal things are being dealt in this term. So with this we have come to an end.